This is a special meeting of council 09/18 of Monday, April 16th. Are there any addendum items, Madam Clerk?
No, there are no addendum items tonight.
I entertain a motion to confirm the agenda. Moved by Councillor Main, seconded by Councillor Demeray. Are there any disclosures of interest this evening? There being none indicated, it shall be so noted, Madam Clerk. There are no delegations this evening, and the items for consideration, I would accept a motion to move that item. Madam Demeray? Seconded? Seconded by Madam Butters. Mr. Sinnes, would you like to commence your presentation, and we'll hold all the questions until you've completed your submission, your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just had to get some water, maybe a long night. So this evening, Mr. Mayor, we're here to discuss the wastewater budget and proposed rates for the city of Port Colborne. I have to say that this is a budget that's had a lot more detail and consideration that had to go into it from a staff perspective because of some of the circumstances that we've encountered mostly in 2017, but it started in 2016. And I'm going to go through a number of these issues that we had to take into consideration in the fact of determining the rate structure that we put forward. So there's, and I did provide to council and staff my PowerPoint presentation. So you do have that with you. And also you have two spreadsheets that I have provided for council. And one of them is a municipal water comparison. So it gives, and we'll go over that a little later. It's just comparing the rates that we know from other municipalities and our municipality, and three different levels of usage and how that, what the costs are there. And then the other spreadsheet is, and I'll go through this a little later also, and basically it's just showing a progression of where we started and how we got to the rates that we are proposing this evening. So we'll go over those after I go over the presentation. It gives sort of an idea of our thought process going through this budget. So some of the issues that we saw that were affecting the 2018 budget is a number of things. So the first thing is our 2017 water year end. We, for both water and wastewater, we ended up with a deficit in the year, and there's varying reasons why that happened. And in order to cover the deficit, essentially there was a number of, in the water, not so much as wastewater, but there was capital that we had budgeted for in 2017 that essentially we did not put into capital reserves in order to have a balanced budget, so to eliminate that deficit. So the fact is that we, in 2017, I think in the water, we were able to put in capital, or to pay for some of the capital that we did in 2017, about $500,000. The balance of it we couldn't put into reserves for future. And in 2017, basically none of the capital allocations that we budgeted for in 2017 were we able to put into the capital reserve because we had to use it to cover the deficit. And that's partly in the year-end report. So those are two things, and we said, okay, what caused those? And there's a number of reasons that I'll get into that basically we saw that caused us to run those deficits. And the fact is that a lot of the operating costs that we had, staff cut back on doing some of the operations because basically we knew that we weren't receiving the revenues that we had budgeted for. And that's what it really comes down to, is the budgeted revenues were not being met through the actual metered sales, both in water and in wastewater. Because as you know, wastewater revenues are based on the same number that's read over your water meter. So your water is based on the meter consumption. The wastewater is also based on the meter consumption for revenues. So based on that, we looked at our capital allocation. As you know, we normally would apply about 2 to 5% increase on our capital allocation every year in order to reduce that infrastructure deficit on the water and wastewater side of things. So in 2018, we looked at that and said, okay, this year we really don't have a choice to increase our capital. We'll keep our capital the way it was for 2017, but we won't put a 2 or 5% increase to that. So we kept it status quo. The crux of a lot of what we found in 2017 and also 2016, because if you remember 2016, we had some smaller deficits in 2016, so that's why I said it sort of started in 2016. And we basically have increased costs. We do have increased costs coming our way, both regional costs for water purchases and the fact that we're not meeting our revenues, and we're not on the cost side. The regional costs, although they've been sort of stabilized, we're not able to meet our revenues to cover those costs because of the fact that we have higher water loss or higher wastewater infiltration, and we'll show you that in a little bit. So we have decreasing revenues which are not meeting our budgeted revenue. In 2017, our actual annual water sales did not meet our projected annual revenue by about $500,000. And basically, it's telling us that our usage rates are too low, or not high enough to meet the expenditures that we do have. One of the reasons is potentially higher unaccounted for water than what was expected and what was budgeted in the past. That's on the water side of things. On the wastewater, wastewater flows are very unpredictable. As you know, extraneous flows are high and mainly due to weather. And you'll see that for example, 2016 was a dry year, and we consumed, or the wastewater flows were about 3 million cubic meters. In 2017, which is a very wet year, it was about 4.3 million cubic meters. So it fluctuates year to year and mostly based on weather. Again, the wastewater revenues currently are not enough to cover our expenses, and essentially that's telling us that our rates are too low in covering all of our 100% of our expenses. And majority of our expenses, I have to say, are fixed. The fact that, and I'll show you, the really only variable expense that we do have is what we purchase from the region, or what the region treats in wastewater. That's really the only variable cost that we do have, because it's directly related to what's being used as to what we bill based on meter usage. The problem with that is that there's a part of it which is not fixed because, or not variable, because it is fixed because of the fact that we can't bill a lot of that water because it's unaccounted for. And wastewater that's going into the treatment plant is unaccounted for. So there's that difference that basically we have to cover, the municipality has to cover, because we can't bill it back to the consumer. So there's where a lot of our issues are, because you got to figure salaries, wages, normal operating costs of our pumps and what are our pumps? The equipment and all of that. That's all fixed costs. Unless we cut services and lower the level of services in reducing costs, then we still have those costs to pay out on an annual basis. So those are fixed costs. One way of, staff are looking at, one way of trying to reduce the extraneous flows is by having a more extensive storm sewer system in place, and that would reduce some of the source of the extraneous flows, and that's what's been happening, has been happening over the years, but it's just not not finding enough that makes a huge difference. So putting more newer storm sewers in, and we'll be bringing back a report again on the storm sewer fee structure in order to raise revenue so that you can put storm sewers in and hopefully take some of the systems off and some of the sources of extraneous flows off the system. On the wastewater side, the biggest contributor to the problem that we're having right now is with regard to industrial facilities and the reducing or the eliminating of their wastewater flows into our system. It used to be that we had industrial facilities that were contributing about 50% of wastewater flows, and they were paying for that. It's now down to about 6%. So that huge differential is now being picked up by the residential, residential consumer and the commercial consumers, because the industrial we're using over the years so much in wastewater and paying for that. It was covering for their fixed cost of what was paying for the region, but it was also covering all the fixed costs of our operating costs. And with that gone, now we don't have the revenue to cover some of our operating costs, which means our rates have to go up in that respect. So it impacts the rates to generate the revenues required for the cost of the unaccounted for wastewater is what it comes down to. In 2017, we had a major industrial customer that came off the wastewater system. So with that said, in 2017, our deficit was about $800,000. $600,000 of those dollars was due to the fact that that customer came off our system that was paying into the wastewater revenue. In 2018, because they went off sort of about 3/4 of the way into the year, or a quarter of the way into the year of 2017, a full year is about $900,000 that we have to make up within our revenue model in order to sustain our expenditures and pay for our expenditures. So our actual annual wastewater sales, again, have not been meeting projected annual revenues, and we're close to a tune of about $1 million, especially with that $900,000 coming off the system. So again, our rates are too low, so that's why you're seeing our rates being proposed to go up higher this year. And all of this is going to come into play when we have to do our new 10-year water financial plan, which is due in 2019. So if we don't get our system to the point where it should be at today, when we do our 10-year plan, we need to have good information to put together that 10-year plan over the next years. And you'll see, if you remember back in 2010 that we did the first 10-year plan, we've been using that plan over and over again, and you'll see how there was some parts of it that we met, parts of it that we really haven't met, and probably if we would have kept with the 10-year plan, we probably would be in a better situation today. So I'll show you that. So what did we do to try to mitigate all these changes that we've identified? So what we've tried to do in this budget is basically phasing in the actual unaccounted for water and wastewater. So I believe we were probably budgeting. We were budgeting a little low on the unaccounted for water and wastewater, and we're going to try to bring that up to where we believe it should be, and we're going to basically phase that in over the next couple of years. Also, we know that we have sales revenue shortfalls. We're going to try to phase that in over a couple of years of time in order to bring our revenue structure up. What we also did was looked at our operating expenses, and we actually went through and reduced operating expenses by $45,000 for the water, and we reduced the wastewater budget for our city's own operating expenses of $34,500 to try to bring the rates down. We did not increase our capital contributions for 2018. And in 2017, if you remember, Council approved a new operating wastewater operator certified in 2017, and we put that in place in 2017. And the second part of that was that we would put the second person in place in 2018. So what we're proposing that we would bring that person on the last quarter of 2018, so the last 3 months of this year. And so we've only budgeted for that. We'd phase that in over to 2018 and 2019. The other thing that we're doing is we had a wastewater rate stabilization reserve of about $380,000, and we're bringing in $300,000 of that to try to basically try to bring that the rate structure down, that the rates that we are proposing this year.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Just say you're applying your wastewater rate stabilization to capital. It's not really capital, but you just told us in the sentence before that there's no capital increases to budget.
True.
So,
Three.
conflicting. You're telling me in one sentence you're not doing it, 2 sentences later you're telling me you are.
Yeah, I'll explain that.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. When I show you the structure of the water or the wastewater in the wastewater revenue model,
Okay, I'm listening.
we're not adding expenses to our capital. So we're not. So if our capital was $500,000 that we were putting into capital, we're not increasing that by the 4 or 5 or the 5% that we would normally do every year. Okay. So what we've done is all of the expenses that we have that makes up the capital the fixed charge that we established for wastewater. We've reduced that expenditure that makes up that rate. We've reduced it by $300,000 to bring the rate down. Don't understand that?
I'm not
Okay.
quite. Now, because
So-
you're talking capital and rate are 2 different things to me.
Right. So the capital contributions that we put into our that we budget for to put into capital to do capital works, we're not increasing that. That is part of the component that makes up the fixed charge that we charge. Okay. So what we've done is taken $300,000 out of our reserve and reduced the fixed charge component in the revenue in the rate structure. So we're applying it to the rate. We're applying it to reduce the rate. We're not applying it to reduce our capital actual contribution to the budget. Does that make more sense? Okay.
Okay, you may recall that at the beginning of the presentation, I asked that council would hold their questions until the entire presentation was completed.
That's okay. That's fine, Mr. Mayor. So with that said, and you'll see the one spreadsheet, and I'll go over this quickly right now. The one spreadsheet that has the variations. So everything I just talked about as to how we would mitigate the changes. You'll see that the very first section of columns that says base budget before the new operator cost. So that was the structure that we started with. So we basically had a 2.37% increase as a base budget, which is cost of living, is what we added to that. And I'm not going to go through this in detail because we're going to look at it in the presentations. But the next column, what we did then was we then added the full cost of the new certified wastewater operator. And that brought our increase up to about 3.15%. Then we said, okay, now we have all of these issues that we had to deal with, and how does that affect the overall budget? And so in making adjustments to the water and the wastewater budget for the customer coming off the wastewater flows, that customer coming off, for us not being able to meet our projected revenues and making adjustments for that. Basically what we come up to is about a 10% increase overall with all those changes. So then we said, well, okay, what can we do to reduce that? So we then, I mentioned we reduced our water expenditures, operating expenditures by $45,000. That brought it down to 9.48% overall increase. Then we reduced the sewer operating expenses by $34,500, and that brought it down to 8.92%. Then we removed the operator completely, and that brought it down to 8.17%. And then I added in the operator for the last 3 months of the year, and that brought it back up to 8.36%, which is what we're proposing right now to council. So that was the sort of the logic and the progression that we went through in order to come up to the proposed budget that we have today. And then I'll go through some of the all the bottom part of there, the annual costs and all that. I'll go through in the presentation. But that's basically all the mitigation that I just mentioned. That's the step process that we went through to get us from that 10% down to at least the 8.36%. So with that said, I just mentioned that our base operating budget for water and wastewater, the total annual increase would have been about $34 or $3 a month, 2.37%. And that was about a 3% increase in water fixed in usage and a 1.8% increase in wastewater fixed in usage. So that's where we started with. That was our base budget that we would have started with. With all of the changes that we had to take into place, that increases our total annual increase to about $119 or about $10 a month to the average user. The water fixed in usage increase is about $45, which is about $4 a month, and the wastewater fixed in usage increase combined is about $73 or about $6. So there's the $6 and the $4 is the $10 roughly a month increase that's being proposed, with all of the issues taken care of in this year and sort of phased in. So what does that mean? When we look at a comparison between our base budget and what's being proposed, it's about an increase of about $25 on the water side and about $60 on the wastewater side, for about an $85 increase over and above the base budget, which is about $7 a month increase. So on the water operations itself, the usage rate is going to be being proposed to go from $1.17 to $1.27 for the usage. And when I mentioned the water financial plan that we were working off, the 10-year plan. Our 10-year plans basically had us at $1.34 for our usage rate, and you can see we're at $1.27. So that's why I mentioned, I think if we would have been able to stick to the plan of moving that usage rate up, where there was 2 years that we actually had a reduction in our usage rate, if we would have kept that progression going and we would be at the $1.34, we would probably be in a little better situation. But getting to $1.27 will help get us to the next level of the financial plan. The average annual increase is about $27 annually, or about $2.29 a month on the usage rate if you're using your consumption. And the fixed service charge, the capital rate, which is a fixed rate, is proposed to go from $351 annually to $369, or about $18 on the average of an increase over the year, which is about $1.50 a month. So when you blend the two together, the usage and the fixed, you're looking at about a $45 annual increase, or about $4 a month increase. So what I have to say about when you're looking at the usage rates versus the fixed charge rates, I had mentioned it before that the usage rate not only covers the variable cost, which is the purchase of water from the region, it covers a lot of fixed costs that are in the usage rate. So the fact, what happens is if water isn't being used as much as you want people to conserve water, if people aren't using the water, customers aren't using the water, it means we're not generating the revenue that we need to cover our fixed costs. So if it was a true system where the usage rate was based just on the actual cost of what we buy from the region and the purchase cost of that, then that would be a true usage cost. But because we have all the other costs, and I'll show you that in a minute, a lot of other costs included in that usage rate, if we don't get the revenues and the sales of from the customers of using water, then it's not covering off our other operating costs, which are still fixed costs, because we still have to pay salaries and wages and operations costs and so on and so forth. And I'll show you that in a minute on a different slide. So that's the real difference. You can really increase the usage rate and decrease the fixed rate. But what happens is, if you're not getting the consumption from the customers, then we're not generating enough revenue to cover our overall costs. And that's what a lot of municipalities are having a difficult time doing, is getting that usage, getting their fixed rate up to cover their actual fixed costs, because they're depending on usage rates. And if you don't have the usage, or if you don't have a growing population where you have, you're getting more and more residents in, where you can then start spreading that cost out over those residents in their usage of water, and they're paying then for more. We don't have that. We don't have that in Port Colborne right now. And until we get more and more residents in, and you can start spreading that cost and getting more revenue in based on the new any new builds and new residents coming in, then our fixed costs have to stay high, and the usage rates, basically midstream. It's not high, it's not low. So in the water operations, we did see from regional water purchase, the cost went up about $51,000. So that's additional costs that we had to include in our budget. The regional purchase costs about $2.3 million, which is about 47% of our budget. So that particular item there is really the variable cost. That's the usage. And if we were going to base our usage rate just on that, then, and all the rest of the costs will go on the fixed costs, our fixed costs will go up even more, and the usage rate would probably drop, but it would only cover the regional cost that we're getting, because that's the only variable cost that's in place. The other problem with that is the regional costs that we do have, we have to pay for all of that 100%, but it doesn't mean we're getting 100% of that in revenue, because there is unaccounted for water. There is lost water, whether it's stealing of water, they're not paying for the water, or it's being there's breaks in the water main breaks and so on and so forth. Those we have to pay directly. So there is a fixed component to that cost also. I mentioned the city operating decrease. I mentioned it was $45,000. The actual, we decreased our operating expenses by $45,000, but you also remember we had a 2% cost of living increase to some of the other expenditures. So the net amount is $21,662 that was actually reduced in the operating budget, which is about $1.3 million, or 27% of the overall budget. And that $1.3 million, which is the operating cost, is a fixed cost. The capital increase, the only increase to our capital, which is at $1.2 million, is the $22,000, which was that last debenture that we got for the water meters, $300,000 debenture. So our capital is about 25% of the overall budget, and that is, again, a fixed cost that we would have in place. Here's where we believe that part of the problem in the rate structure was that our non-billable water loss has fluctuated anywhere between 27% and 40%, depending on the year. We were budgeting 30% in 2017, and this year, in order to compensate and try for the revenue that we're not generating, I've budgeted 36% as non-billable rather than 30%. And it actually should be up probably about 40%, so again, phasing that in. Again, water is on a 3-year average, so what the region bills us is based on a 3-year rolling average, so it's not on actual, it's on an average, and the amount is increased by about 17,000 cubic meters, or 3 million cubic meters that is being purchased from the region. So overall, our budgeted fixed costs are about 48%. That's including the region and city costs. and the budgeted regional cost is about 51%. So that $2.3 million that we purchased from the region, about 51% is on our fixed rate, and the 48.3% is on our variable rate. So it's a split. So what does that mean in comparison to our water financial plan? So you can see that our usage cost per cubic meter on the water financial plan for 2018, it told us that we should have been at $1.34, and we're actually at $1.27. So the usage rate is lower than our plan. The annual usage cost for under the water financial plan at $1.34 would be about $367, and on our proposed rates it's $348. So you can see our proposed it's still cheaper, $348 versus $367. And on the annual fixed charge, you can see that on the water financial plan it had us at $341, and we're actually at $369, which is higher, which is what we've been trying to do over the last few years, is basically we have been putting more on the fixed charge, and we understand that that has a different effect on, for example, low-income seniors that are not using a lot of water, but they're paying the fixed charge. But if we don't have a fixed charge there, we can't pay for our costs. We can't pay for the operations of the system, which is the unfortunate part. It's not totally based on a usage. So overall, our water financial plan, we should be bringing in about $708. Based on usage and our fixed charge, we're actually bringing in, with this proposed plan, $718, which means we're back on track with our plan, other than the fact that we've reversed the usage rate with the fixed rate. We have a higher fixed rate and a lower usage rate, and that's because of our cost structure. So I had mentioned what was included in the different rate structures. So you can see under the consumption costs, a lot of the costs there, contract services, salaries and wages, benefits, those are fixed costs, but they're under the usage rate. So if we don't have enough usage of consumption of water, then the fact is that we're not able to cover those costs, and that's where we run into potential deficits. You'll see on the regional water purchases, 2.3 million, 1.1 million is under the consumption, and 1.2 million is actually on the fixed, because we know that we can collect on the $1.1 million through the usage rates, but we can't collect the 1.2 because that's unaccounted for dollars, unaccounted for water. So it's on the fixed because we have to pay for that at some point. And you'll see our capital costs, $497,000 and $285. That's on the fixed rate structure. And then administration is split a little bit between consumption and fixed. And the other part of that's on the fixed is all of our is any debt that we have on the water bill. So the fixed costs are basically our capital and the regional water that we know that we're not billing anybody for, because we have to pay for that. So everything else there is on the consumption, but as I said before, our repairs and maintenance, our utilities and telephone, all of those items, even though they're on the usage rate, they're actually fixed costs. We have to pay for those at some point in time. The only thing we can do, and what staff has done, is not spent a lot of that money because we weren't getting the revenue in, because the usage was low. So it's a trade-off. So that's how the water rate, that's the components of the consumption rate and the fixed cost rate. So the water capital program has about $1.2 million. That includes debentures, that includes the capital that we put into capital reserves or for capital projects. Proposed annual increase this year, I'd mentioned, it's 0. We did add the small debenture from 2017, and our annual requirement should be about $2.3 million. That's that infrastructure deficit that we've talked about when we talked about in the general budget. So this is a graph that Darlene was nice enough to put together. This shows on a monthly basis, you can see the orange line is what we purchase from the region. The blue line is what we sell. So you can see the vast difference between what we're purchasing from the region and what we're actually selling. And that's the difference between what we can put on the fixed charge and what we have to put on the usage charge. So you can see on a monthly basis, it's relative to the purchases from the region, what our sales are, but we're not generating enough revenue to cover those costs. So that's on a monthly basis. This slide shows it on a quarterly basis. And you can see the ups and downs, and the big spike, the red, those were the 2 years that we had the frozen water services where we had all the leakages happening. So you can see the spikes that take place there. And when you look at the revenues, you can see below on the blue, we weren't collecting any revenues for those spikes in that. So we have to pay for that, no matter what. But we don't get revenue for that. The next one is a comparison of the blue bars are what we purchase from the region. You can see that the black line is our fixed charge. Those are our fixed revenues coming in, and you've noticed, you can see the trend that it's been going up, which is, we've been doing that on purpose to cover our costs, to get more, so we can ensure that we have revenues coming in to pay for our costs, because those are fixed dollars that we're getting to pay for our fixed costs. The green are our sales. So you can see where our sales have really leveled out over the last few years. So we're not generating any more revenue in our usage sales. And the blue is our cost of purchasing water from the region. So you can see how it's dipped down in 2016, and that was because we had a dry year in 2016, so our costs went down. And then in 2017 it spiked up because we had a wet year in 2017. So you can see the differential between our water purchases and what we're collecting in revenues on an annual basis. That's the water side. The wastewater side is a whole different animal. So our usage rate, we're proposing to go from $1.25 to $1.29, which is about $12 annually or $1 a month. The fixed service charge, this is where the majority of the increase is coming, is the fixed charge on the wastewater. And that's going from $410 to $472, which is about a $61 annual increase, or about $5 a month. Blending the whole system together for wastewater, usage and fixed, you're looking at about a $73 annual increase, or $6 a month. And again, this is a direct result of the industrial customer coming off the system and us not being able to generate that revenue. And it's also due to the fact that we believe that there's more extraneous flows out there than what we've been budgeting for in the past. So with that said, even though it's going up, regional fixed costs have actually decreased $95,000 to $3.9 million from about $4 million. But the regional fixed cost is about 71% of our budget. So that's a huge amount of our budget. And if we're not able to collect all of that in revenue, then we have to pay for it directly, which means that's why our fixed costs, our fixed service charge is going up, because we have to pay for that. Our city operating, we have a decrease of about $15,000. Again, that's net of the cost of living increase. So that's about 15% of our budget, and our capital is about $751,000, or 13% of our budget. So our budget is really only about 30%, 29% is the city's budget, where a majority of it is what we're paying to the region for treatment of the water. The region is on a 3-year rolling average of flows, so and that's decreased by about 266,000. So they're billing us based on 4.2 million cubic meters of wastewater treatment. And the 3-year average is going down from 4.2 million to 3.9 million. And that's basically because we had a really dry year in 2016 at 3 million. So it's brought the average down a bit. The crux of it is the non-billable flows. We're estimated anywhere from 35, it should be about 56%, 60% I mean, that should be 35 to 60%. We were budgeting 35%, and we've raised that to 56%. And the reason for that is, one, the industrial flows where we've seen that it's higher, and the fact that that we have industrial coming off of the system. So we know that has to go up. On the capital program for wastewater, we put in about $752,000. We're not increasing it this year. And our annual requirement should be about $1.2 million. So we're not reaching that just yet. So with that said, this next slide just shows on the wastewater side, it shows the top line, which is in the red, is our cost, what we pay to the region for wastewater treatment. So you can see how high that is. And our blue line is our annual sales. And you can see in 2016 and 2017 how our annual sales, or the revenue that we're collecting for wastewater from our customers, has dropped dramatically in 2016 and 2017. And that's one of the reasons why we have to look at how we have to raise up that fixed service charge in order to compensate for those lost revenues, for that lost revenue. You can see the black line is our fixed charges, which we did increase in 2015 and 2016. We kept it fairly stable in 2017, but we need to, we're budgeting for it to go up in 2018. So you can see the difference there. What we have in reserves, we have about $499,000 in reserves in the water reserve, mostly earmarked towards the bulk water station and meter pits. We don't have a rate stabilization anymore for our water. The wastewater, we had a rate stabilization of $380,000. We're using $300,000 in that to help the budget this year. And majority of the CSO and the sewer capital project, that's $2 million. Last year we said that we were dedicating that to pay for the Elm Street water main, so we didn't have to debenture it, and then the water budget pay back the sewer budget over a period of time. Unfortunately, we weren't able to start that in 2017 because we had that deficit. So we have to make sure that we do meet our budgeted revenues and our budgeted expenditures so that we can put the money aside for capital in the future. So at the end of this, our proposed annual rates, we're looking at $119 with the increase, which is about $27 on usage from water, $18 in fixed, $12 in the sewer usage, and $61 in the sewer fixed charge. Roughly about, we're looking at what did I say? I should have a total on that. 9, 5, 14, 17, about $30 a month. On a quarterly basis, as we bill quarterly right now, that would be about $30 quarterly on a bill, on an average bill. So instead of paying about $356 a quarter, it would be $386 a quarter, which is about $30 overall on a quarterly basis on an annual bill, or on a billing cycle. So with that said, Mr. Mayor, that is the presentation. Other than I do have the other sheet that was provided to council, which was a comparison of municipalities. And there's 3 calculations on there. There's one at 20 cubic meters per quarter, and 60 cubic meters per quarter, and the use of 72 cubic meters per quarter. And you can see that based on the proposal from Port Colborne, our rates, if you're looking at the 72 cubic meters per quarter, ours would be about $395 per quarter. And you have Welland at about $400, which is a little higher than ours. Fort Erie at $566. And you can see that Fort Erie is a good comparison for Colborne, because we live in the same geographic area along the lake, rock and the types of material that we have here. So, and you can see that what Fort Erie's been doing is basically the same as what we're doing, which is they have a higher fixed cost component, and their usage rates are actually their usage rates are higher than ours. So they're higher on both ends. And you can see across the board, everybody is all over the map. When you look at each municipality, some don't have sewer either. Grimsby, for example, their sewer is on their tax bill, so you can't compare to them. Others, Lincoln doesn't have a lot of water users, but they have high usage rate because it's more variable, because they don't have as much what we have, and their fixed cost is lower. But you can see that across the board with the different municipalities, where some are higher in usage rates, some are lower. But overall, I think the average you're looking at about $300 is roughly the average, and we're at about that $395. So, Mr. Mayor, if there's any questions, I know Chris is here with his team, especially when it gets to questions with regard to the water and the wastewater, the flows and things like that. So they're here to answer any questions on those issues there.
Thank you, Mr.
I'll open that up, Mr. Mayor.
Mrs. Butters, you had your hand up there early on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When you mentioned that industrial user came off, and that was in the realm of, I don't know, like $900,000, I don't think I'm understanding very well. If they were, they now treat their own water. So if their stuff was going into the system in which their dirty water was getting treated, and it did cost that much, and then they treat their own water, like, why isn't that saving money? Like, I'm not getting that.
I'll start, and then if Chris or Darlene has anything to add.
Well, because we're going to be talking about that.
Yeah.
So, but that just is another one that just came off?
Just came off in 2017.
So we had one already come off?
Yes.
So this is another one?
Yes. This just came off in 2017,
Okay.
large one. So the answer to that question is, if you remember, I mentioned that our wastewater flows basically are at about 50% that we collect, we're actually able to bill. So the other 50% we have to pay for 100%. So when somebody comes off the system, they're, yes, paying for partly for the treatment of the wastewater, 50% of it, but the other revenue, the 50% of what they're paying, is to cover our operating costs. And so if they're not paying us the 100%, we're only getting 50 cent dollars on it. So therefore, we're not covering our costs, which means we have to raise the rates in order to generate revenue to cover the costs or the revenue that we're losing from that particular industry, or any industry for that matter that comes off the system. Because they're only, if I mentioned that the usage rate only covers really the cost of the treatment from the region. But the usage rate is 50% on the fixed and 50% on the usage. So if they're not paying us any revenues at all, then yes, we're saving on the fixed part of it because we don't have to pay the region, but that 50% that's on our operating or on our usage cost, we're not getting that revenue from them to help cover off the cost of the rest of our operating costs. costs itself, which means we're going to end up with a deficit if we can't cover those costs. It's, well, I'll to be honest, and I'm not sure if you got anything else to add, but I'll be honest with you, you know, as much as you want people to conserve water, and we want people to conserve water, it hurts us in the end, because you have a two-rate structure. You have a usage rate structure and you have a fixed rate structure. But all your costs, majority of your costs, are all fixed. And a lot of your fixed costs are on that usage rate. So if people aren't using the water, yes, they're, whatever they're using, they're paying for whatever we pay to the region, but the rest of that cost, we're still absorbing it without getting any revenue. So if our rates aren't, so that's the problem when you have that two-tier rate structure. To be honest with you, all of it, most of the costs are fixed, so majority of it should be on a fixed rate rather than a usage rate. But that's not what people see, and that's not what customers want, because they want to basically pay based on what they use, thinking that what they're paying for on the usage is covering all the costs, but it's not.
Okay. And my other concern is I don't even know how many years around this table we have talked about unaccounted for water loss and all the different, you know, miles and miles of pipes that have been replaced, and we still have this unbelievable percentage of loss. Like, is there like an alien mothership sucking the water out of our system somehow? Like, I have to, like, we fix so much stuff. How much more stuff do we have to fix before this makes an impact on this unaccounted loss? I'm just baffled. Mothership, bring it back.
Mr. Lee, do you have a
Through
comment?
you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Butters. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's quite obvious in the numbers, you can see that. But we are, for lack of a better term, chasing this, but it seems to be that the more we try, I mean, we are winning at times, but there are times when we do not. But that said, I think we have to continue to try to work at this and do repairs and things of this nature. The problem is that if you look at this and what Peter's prepared is an actual financial plan, a financial stability scenario, despite what the losses and the revenues may be, if you look at the financial side of the equation, what he's proposing here is how can we make this self-sustaining, for lack of a better term. So his increases are addressing that, hopefully. And with that self-sustaining, we have to include a capital component, which you notice we've reduced because of the cost being so high. We're trying to control what we can control immediately, what we have within our grasp. That being said, at some point in time, we have to start putting more funds into those capital sides to do more of those repairs. And I think that, I wouldn't necessarily say delinquent, but that's what we're behind right now. And that takes money, but we have to be careful of how we adjust the rates. We don't want to put the rates too high to get all the funds up front to fix all these all at once, because that would be unconscionable. We wouldn't want to do that, and nobody would want to swallow that pill, none of us. So what we're trying to do with this budget with Peter, and we've had great discussions on this, is to how do we bring this about in a gradual, less painful way, for lack of a better term. The bottom line is we have an infrastructure that's aging. Darlene can give comments on the exact ratios of an age and whatever, because I know she has those at the end of her fingertips. That's what she's really good at. But that being said, if you have specific questions to that, we'll answer those, but that'll give you an idea of how aged our infrastructure is and how we have to continue to move forward on the capital side. But at this point in time, we're holding back because we realize the deficiencies that we currently have within the system, aka the losses, and we're trying to address that in a step-by-step slow process. Hopefully I've answered some of your questions as to where we're going.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And my last question is, so in terms of the water loss side of it, does anybody know whether or not it's more about the main pipes that carry water, or the laterals that go into homes? I mean on providing water, fresh, clean water.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Butters, if you look at the long-term numbers that Peter has put up, the city's actual consumption has been very consistent. And we're having a decrease in the revenues from the sales that we're able to record. So we suspect that there may be some theft in the equation that we're not able to catch at this point in time. And we're not making any accusations or anything, but it's just a generalization of what we're seeing. So this is something that we have to address going forward. The first step in that was with the new meters, which gave us more accurate readings, and then that is showing some other factors, for lack of a better term, which is what we're hoping to get our heads around as to how to fix this and capture this.
Mr. Doucette, and then
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. First of all, first thing I have to do is I have a constituent that dropped this off. You have a copy of the letter. Everyone got a copy of it, but I want to read it into the record to make it public as well. In light of the upcoming water budget, I would like you to consider a few points. As we all know, Port Colborne has the highest fixed water, wastewater costs in the Niagara region. Factoring in the fixed costs for water and wastewater, low water users in Port Colborne are paying a considerably higher amount of water and wastewater per cubic meter compared to high water users. Gives an example. For example, a household that uses 50 cubic meters per 3 months pays effectively $2.92 per cubic meter of water and $3.30 per cubic meter of wastewater. A household that uses 20 cubic meters, more likely seniors and single parent, in the same time frame pays $5.56 per cubic meter for water and $6.38 per cubic meter of wastewater. As to not skew the cost in disfavor of the low user even more, all the required increases in the new budget should be applied to the water and wastewater consumption rates. And best regards, Horst Jacob. I believe Horst is out here. He's been coming to our meetings. That concerns me. And the reason it concerns me is that it means that anyone who is doing what we've been asking them to do for years, which is use less water, is now paying considerably more because they're using less. And I don't know how to fix that, except for the way Horst put it, let's put it on the usage rate and let's make sure the usage rate. But the thing is trying to fix what you guys are talking about. The usage rate would have to go up considerably to the point where it may not be even famine. It wouldn't make sense to do it. So anyway, I want that put in the record. The way that we're billing the water is definitely not favoring people that are using less. And if we're trying to encourage people to use less, because Canadians are probably some of the worst water users in the whole world, after all that goes, this kind of rates, these type of rates will not allow us to encourage that. And I have a concern with that. So anyway, there it is. Maybe Peter, you have an answer to that?
I don't think there's a correct answer for any of it, to be honest with you. I think it's, us trying to do our best job in making sure that we're collecting enough revenue to meet our costs. And the gentleman's correct. The fact is that you use less water, you're still paying a fixed charge, so essentially your cost can be higher. But if you do put the usage rate up in order to compensate for the costs and cover our costs, you'd have to put the usage rate up considerably higher. And as much as and he's correct, as much as our fixed cost is is higher than a lot of the other municipalities, and it is. The only one that's higher on a fixed cost on a monthly basis is Fort Erie. But on the usage side, and you can see our usage rate is, for the most part, lower than most municipalities other than, well, no, we are lower than majority of the municipalities here in the usage rate, or pretty close. So there's where the differential comes in, and how each municipality is structured their rates. And again, it depends on the municipality itself. It depends on how big the municipality is. It depends on how much water usage they do have. Maybe another municipality is using more water, therefore they're gaining more revenues to cover their costs. So it's very difficult to compare municipality to municipality. Like I said before, I think probably the closest to us in comparison is Fort Erie, and their variable rates and their usage rate and their fixed cost rate is higher, and that's because I think they're trying to do what we're doing, which is creating a good, stable, sustainable system, so that going into the future you have enough revenue to cover your costs and enough revenue to put into your infrastructure. And because if you don't do that, you have the potential of having difficulties with your water system going forward if you're not replacing your mains, if you're not watching your water quality, and so on. And Darlene can speak to that. So, yes, you would like to see the usage rate be higher, because take some of the pressure off the fixed, and the lower users would get the benefit of that. But it's not going to help us in the long run, because if you look at, and I mentioned, when you look at this slide here, and you see what makes up the usage rate and what makes up the fixed rate, you can see that if we raised the usage rate, then and reduce the fixed costs, that $1.2 million of regional water purchases that we can't bill anybody, we're not going to be able to collect the revenue on that. We're not going to be able to pay that bill. That's the problem we run into. So, in order to do that, it's good in theory that if you're able to do that, and if this $2.3 million from the region was totally recoverable, then I could see the usage rate dropping down, and it would come off that fixed cost, and the fixed cost would drop. But we don't have that. That's the problem, and that's the biggest component of both, not only the water, but also the wastewater. If we're able to collect even 90% of what we pay to the region or what we purchase, and put it on the consumption rate would go up, the fixed cost rate would go down, and that would make sense, because now majority of your consumption cost is on your usage rate and not your fixed rate. But we're not there. We're at 50-50 almost. So 50%, we're not collecting revenue on that. So it has to be on our fixed cost in order to pay for it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's the dilemma we're in.
Okay. Follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you. A comment, just so that everyone in Port Colborne understands. The other thing is that provincially we cannot run a deficit, so we must pay for everything that we pay out to the region and everything. So if we don't have the revenues for it, we have to find it somewhere else. And that's also critical as well. That's just a comment I think that everyone has to understand. We have no choice. That's the way it works. That's the way the system works.
And to that, Mr. Mayor, you're correct, exactly. And if we ran a deficit in a year, we have to collect that deficit the next year, which means the rates go up the next year. Yeah. Because we have to then recoup that in order to cover that previous year's deficit, okay, which just compounds the problem.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, the wastewater overflows.
Last question.
Yes. Wastewater overflows that we have. You were indicating that it went up by 1.3 or 1.6 million cubic meters in 1 year because we had a very wet year. Okay, they went from 3 million something to 4 million something, which means that there is still a hell of a lot of infiltration going on in our system. Our system isn't tight. Do we have any idea where those are, and are we working on them? I mean, I know we've just finished doing, you know, the one area, and we replaced almost everything underground. And I know that quite a few years ago we did the Bell area, and that helped. But there's got to be a hell of a lot more infiltration than those two areas only. So I just want to know, do we have an idea, and do we have a plan to eventually eliminate most of it? You'll never be able to eliminate all of it, but most of it.
Mr. Lee, you have a comment?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Doucette. Speaking to that, what you refer to as leaking pipes, well, we've done a lot of TV photos. We have a regular program. So the actual pipes themselves, yes, there are some leaks, but the quantity of those leaks based on the volume that we're seeing doesn't coincide. The main culprit, if you would, is the what we technically call an illegal connection, or a sanitary sewer and a storm sewer being interconnected within the properties. So with the storm sewer programs, that, as you mentioned earlier, we're just bringing one on stream now that's getting near its completion. That will give us in excess of 150 homes now that won't be contributing to that number in 2018 that were contributing in 17. And when you get, for example, this past weekend, we have these types of events with Mother Nature, the contribution from those types of interconnections, if you would, cause a huge amount of extraneous flows, of what we refer to them as. So that's an ongoing process, and in the report that Peter had written previously, you'll see we've mentioned in there the issues about the storm sewers and how we can fund them, how do we get about that. That's all part and parcel. So moving forward with that, the more that we can create areas that have designed storm sewers, that we can give those connections, then we can bring those interconnections, if you would, out of the system, and then hopefully continue to bring that down. Right now, I think it's approximately 40% of the city has designed storm sewers. So the majority of the municipality does not have a proper designed storm sewer with proper storm sewer connections. And then that hinders us in those numbers.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Sinnes?
Just to add to that is the one area that we don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is that we don't have are able to check are the laterals that go from the household to our mains. And if they're old and if they're leaking and cracked and all that, you've got a lot of infiltration going into those pipes, which we don't know about. Is that fair to say, Chris?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's absolutely correct. That's one other factor in the equation. When we do sanitary sewer replacements, we make the system tight on the street and up the property line, but beyond that, it becomes the property owner's responsibility / issue. And we hope to correct those in time and bring those to their attention, but it's a work in progress. I can only comment in that regard.
Councilor Kenny, then Councilor Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sitting here wondering why we're even having this meeting when we've just been told that doesn't matter what we decide, it has to be done. That's what we just got told. It doesn't matter what we think about this or how we feel, and how I feel is that this is really, I get about all this extraneous. Actually, the best comment tonight we had was from my friend, Councillor Butters. It's definitely an alien stealing the water because we can never account for it. We've been talking about lost water since I've been on council. I'm in my 20th year. I'll be completing my 20th year at the end of this term. And we've been talking about that since I've been on council. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse by the percentages here shown. So we need to discuss it. The public needs to be made aware. But when I look at these amount, and everybody goes, oh, it's only $7.44, or it's only $11.99. That money to a person who's on a low income, it affects them. And it affects them greatly. Not so much for the person who's working or has a good pension, not so much. And I don't have even an answer to give anybody. When they say to me, how come that went up? I said, oh, we don't have a choice. That's what I'm going to be telling them. We don't have a choice. Because You're telling me the government's dictating to us now that we have to have all these things in place. And in order to have all these things in place, yep, we got to raise your fixed rate. Yep, we got to raise your usage rate, and that's what it's going to cost you, and that's the way it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. And that makes me very angry, very angry. And the lost water, hey, Councillor Butters, congratulations, because you have figured it out when nobody else can. That's all I want to say, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Sass, any comment to that?
I don't know what I can say to Councillor Kinney's comments, other than the fact what we're trying to do is I guess what we're trying to bring to council is a realistic picture of where we're at today, and trying to bring forward rates that will be able to move forward in the future and be able to cover our costs, both usage and fixed costs, and being able to put money aside in capital so we can do those capital projects. If we continue to have a year like we had in 2017 where we can't put the money aside that we budgeted for into capital projects, then we're not going to be able to do the replacement of water and wastewater pipes. And that'll just put us in a worse situation in the future. So we did a more detailed analysis of the flows and the loss unaccounted for water and wastewater, and I think that in doing so we've come up with I think better projections of where we stand with regard to those percentages, and we're trying to then build those into this rate structure so that when we do our 10-year plan next year that we're at least starting on something that's going to be stable going forward.
Councilor Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter. Peter, I totally understand everything you said, believe it or not. It took me a while, but I got there. But I would just like to make a couple of comments, and I have several questions. I do have something here that was printed. It comes from an online source. It's something from the city of St. Catharines, where a statement is being made here. We are committed to keeping our water and wastewater systems self-sustaining in spite of declining water usage and revenues, while keeping rate increases modest for our customers. We continue our commitment to being an affordable city for young people, families, and retired older adults by keeping the 2018 water and wastewater rates increase at an increase that is comparable to inflation. How does our proposed increase compare to inflation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The base budget that I originally put together was based on a inflationary cost of living, which was at 2.3%. And then built in all the issues that we've identified in order to try to rectify where we are and where we are going forward. And so we did start with that cost of living and said, okay, based on that cost of living increase, that's fine, but now we have these other issues that we have to deal with, which is the declining revenues, the higher percentages of unaccounted for water, wastewater, the industrial coming off the system, which directly affects our revenues to cover our costs. All those factors come into play, and that's where we're at today.
Okay, I just wanted to hear that you did start off that way at least. All right, something was said just a few minutes ago that really disturbed me, and that is about not being able to track the lost water in the laterals. How do we ever get to a place where we're going to be able to get a hold of all this lost water if we can't do that? And that may be more a question to Chris.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Demery. First of all, a question of you to make certain I'm answering the right question. You mean the lost waters in the sanitary sewer laterals, or the?
So no, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the water coming into the
water coming in.
So when there's a point where you cannot track it anymore before it gets to the meter.
Correct. What's happening is with the current water system, the way it's set up with the distribution system and with the metering, We're having the meters record, and the new metering program that we just completed gives us a good, fairly accurate, I think as accurate as we can ever expect to get. So that being said, that factor's been taken out of the equation. As I had indicated previously, we suspect that there may be some theft involved in this equation, but we have to try and find out the source of that without, I mean, you know, I'm not saying that everybody is stealing water by any means, but, you know, that is a possibility that we have to investigate and make certain that's not part of the equation. In referencing what I'd said earlier, if you look at the rate of, or the quantity of water that the municipality has used over the last 8 to 10 years, it's been fairly consistent, which indicates to us initially that there hasn't been a major break or a leak happening or something that's changed the system, because it's been fairly consistent. Our revenues have dropped, but our consumption as a municipality hasn't. So the drop in revenues does not correlate to the consumption, and this is where we're confused now as to how to, so hence we're thinking that these are the other sources of that unaccounted for.
Okay, so, and you do have a plan to deal with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good, thank you. Okay, now, my biggest problem here is that the low water users are the ones that are sort of taking the largest hit. And that really does bother me. And I don't think that these are people who are trying to conserve water. I think it's a situation where the demographic is changing. You have more single people living in a single residence. They just can't possibly use the amount of water to become an average water user. But over time, those single people are going to represent average water use. Because more and more, that's what we're seeing. We're having a shift. You're seeing less families. So you're seeing less homes with 4 and 5 and 6 people in them. You're seeing homes more with 1 or 2 people in them. So they're all going to be low water users. What happens, how do we plan for that for the future?
Mr. Seth?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and that's exactly what's been happening. I know when talking to Darlene today, she went through some calculations as to how many households are actually using the different levels of water usage. And there's a high number that are using a low water usage. And that's exactly what we're seeing. The fact is that our usage, like the usage has leveled, as Chris said, is leveled out, but our usage that's being billed, metered, has dropped. And as soon as, when your usage is dropping and we're not collecting revenue based on usage, then that's where the fixed charge, that's why the fixed charge, we've been raising the fixed charge, because we're not meeting our revenue projections with just the usage rates. Okay. And that's the problem that we're running into. So, and that's what I said when we went to this slide here, where when we look at our financial plan, when we looked at 10 years and how we thought things were going to happen over 10 years, obviously you can't project out 10 years, but we thought we'd be around $341 in fixed charge. We're at $369 and increasing. And you can see that the usage has gone down. Our usage rate should have been higher, but it's actually lower. So that's exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
And so we've just seen the reverse of that. But in order to be able to generate the revenue to pay for the cost of the system, the switch to fixed costs is what provides us with the definitive revenue that we'll be able to collect in order to pay for the system, where the usage rate doesn't give us that, because it's obviously based on what they use. So
then the new 10-year plan that we're going to see next year will really address all of this.
It'll be interesting.
Yeah,
yes.
It sounds like it really will. Another thing, I have a few questions, obviously. Okay, I found that just looking at population and the way things are laid out, it seems Thorold would be more comparable to Port Colborne, but Thorold does their building a little bit differently. So is there any way you can actually shake that out and let us know if we are really comparable to Thorold as far as the costs go?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, like I know looking at Thorold, their usage rates are a little higher than ours, and their fixed is quite a bit lower. So again, I'm not sure what would be all included in their variable versus fixed. to compare, so, you know, we'd have to get a detailed analysis of
Okay.
how they do it in order to actually compare, and it also depends on on the demographics that
Yeah.
Thorold has versus Port Colborne,
Yeah.
and, because I know they do have industry also.
That they do.
And,
Yeah, they do.
but do they have industry that's still on the system, or have they come off the system?
Yeah.
So those are the differences we have to look at.
And also, on this chart, there's 3 numbers right along the side that are sort of outside of any of the graphs. What do they mean?
That's, okay, that's for information purposes. What it is when you see the first row where it's 20 cubic meters per quarter.
Yeah.
Well, 20 times 4
Is the 80,
is
all right,
the
I got
80.
you.
And that's- yeah.
Okay, it wasn't in the graph, and I thought, that's all. Okay, that's good.
good eye.
And the other thing, something I would like to suggest moving forward, because the public is really tuned in to costs these days, and let's face it, the taxpayers' pockets are getting emptied. And it seems to be, you know, on a daily basis, they're paying through the nose for everything, and I really get the level of frustration, because I'm one of them, so I get that. It would really be nice if, when we have things like a water main that's leaking and water's bubbling up out of a road, that we don't let it sit for 3 weeks. You know, we get complaints from the public that, oh, we're increasing their water, but look what we do. We let that just sit and we waste their water. Well, we might know that that's covered in a part of a construction cost or whatever. We might know that, but they don't know that. So, you know, it just gives the wrong visual. So if we could make an attempt at getting out there and stepping on these water leakages right away, or, you know, doing something, putting something out even on social media to let them know, we're on it, but this is what's happening, it would be just a good thing. And that's all I had to say.
Any comment, Mr. Lee?
You, Mr. Mayor, do it, Councilor Demery. We can definitely do that. We can communicate either through the city's webpage and all of our Twitter and whatever, and once we know more and once we get more details, we can communicate quantities, volumes, what those costs were, weren't, what we did save or what we weren't able to save, or what happened. Or by all means, we can definitely be more user friendly.
Mrs. Butter, then Mr. Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So for the next 10-year plan, and you'd mentioned that some other municipalities do their billing differently. Would we be wise to look, is there like maybe different methods or different ways that would mitigate this going forward, like 2019 10-year plan type stuff, in terms of how we do it and changes how maybe we should be looking at? You mentioned that one of the municipalities, they have a portion of it on their taxes. And I know that when this all got separated out, it was to make it more clear and to make it so that everybody knew really what they were paying for, which I think is a good thing. But when I think about maybe those companies that come off of a system, would they have still been paying if it was coming out of the taxes? Like, I don't know how that would work, but maybe you'd have a comment on that.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor. That was one of the things way back when that you had to basically take both the water and the sewer off taxes, so that it's a self-sustaining system and it's funded on its own. Yes, there is one, maybe 2 municipalities that still have a portion of their wastewater on the levy. I believe that they're looking at taking it off and putting it on the full system, which is where it should be. I'm not sure what the reasons were for not doing it at the time, but all of them are definitely, the water is all, for every municipality, is on their own system, and the wastewater really hasn't been legislated like the water has, but essentially they go hand in hand, so that's why they're sort of on the same billing cycle. As far as going forward, the only other thing that I would suggest, if we're looking at the potential of a different type of grading system or having somebody in to look at our system, is there are consultants out there that will come in and take a look at your system and decide, hey, is there a better way of putting it together? Is there a better rate structure system that can be used? It is something that can be done, and obviously if council is agreeable to hire a consultant to come in and review it and come up with a rate structure, but there is obviously a cost to that. And some municipalities do that. And if you remember going back in what, late 80s, I guess, Chris, when this rate structure was developed for us, and we've been using it ever since, and revising it here and there based on the different situations that we run into, like industrial and that type of thing. But it is something that can be looked at some point in time, is to determine, hey, let's take a look at our overall rate structure and see if there's some tweaking that can be done to make it better. The costs are the costs, so you know what your costs are, and when you look at that, it's a fairly simple calculation when you add up all your consumption costs and you divide it by the number of users you have to come up with your rates. It's not rocket science, but there's a few other, obviously there's a few other things you can do in flipping costs between fixed and usage percentage-wise, which adjusts those two different rates. But again, if your regional cost, for example, if we reduced the fixed cost here and put it onto the usage cost, that's just a percentage that we're using. And that's why I say in my report, when I said we were using 30% versus 36%, it's those percentages splitting between the two to come up with what's the proper revenue that we want to generate in order to cover our costs.
Yeah, and you just mentioned, maybe if there might be grants or something out there to cover such an investigative thing, because I wouldn't want to cost the system more money, that's for sure. I might as well just go find the alien mothership and tell her to pay her her freight on this.
Mr. Main.
Thank you. The aliens are starting to look pretty darn good to me, too. Mike?
You probably didn't want to hear that last comment. How does the region, the region started all this basically, right? We buy and they take it back. How are their rates affect us? Or is it, because you said it went up to 51,000 or whatever. Does that have any effect on our system? Very much?
Yes, whatever the rate, the region raised their water purchase rate by about 2%, which is roughly that $50,000. So that is an additional cost to our system. So that gets added in as that's part of the $2.36 million. So it gets added in and it gets split between fixed and consumption rate, and yes, so it's all part of the overall cost.
So the region should take some responsibility for our budget, really and truly.
Yes and no. Like they definitely set the purchase price to the municipalities based on their costs also, and so they set their rates, and they had about a 2% increase overall, which is roughly what we were starting with, which was 2%. And like I said, it's the other variables that have really played havoc with us.
Okay, good. I've got a few more questions here. This one's for Chris. Peter, take a rest. How does our collapsed sewer systems, and we do have a lot of them here, storm sewers, how does that affect, our high water in the lake and in the canal? How does that affect our sewer system? Now, is any of that coming into, like our laterals, for example?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Main. I assume you're referring to the deficient storm sewer system and then how it affects our sanitary system, is that correct? It definitely has an effect. First of all, in some areas we don't even have a sanitary or storm sewer system as we would know it. That being said, you have more surface water, you have more runoff and groundwater within those locations because you don't have storm sewers that are actually taking the water that's being pumped from sump pumps, for instance, and footing drains on homes. And you don't have water coming from people's runoffs from their yards and their driveways. So that's going into the ground, which is affecting the groundwater adjacent to those homes, which then increases the potential for infiltration of water within their sanitary sewer laterals. And if they have a connection that we commonly call an illegal connection, but which doesn't meet our sewer bylaws, and it actually has stormwater dumping into those sanitary sewer laterals, then those are increases as well. So you're absolutely right. The lack of a functioning, tight storm sewer system definitely has an effect on our extraneous flows in the sanitary system.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask Darlene a question because she's been sitting there patiently waiting to get her input in here. Now, last year I went and asked for a graft to see what my usage was because I had a real high payment for water, and it really helped me out quite a bit. Now, do we have the technology to put a graft in each bill for each house? Because sometimes the leaks are very, very, very small, but at the end of 3 months, you know, they're very, very high, right? So do we have that technology in our system to do that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Main. We do have the technology to download water meters, but we don't yet have the technology that we could actually do it kind of simultaneously when we did all the water meter reads. Because currently to download the data logger in the new meters, the technician has to go out front of the house, punch in the ID number for the meter inside the house, and then download it, and then send the file off to the homeowner. There is technology out there, but it's an added expense, where our homeowners could actually go right online and check their consumption themselves. But when we did the meter project 3 years ago, that was at a cost of about $250,000 to do that. So currently we have our meters have the capability. We don't have the supporting technology to offer that service yet.
Okay, just wondering.
Okay.
But thank you. I have a solution, and I shared it with these ladies over here. It could be outhouses, wells, and windmills. That might get us out of this dilemma, but I don't think by law that's allowed. So thank you for your time, Darlene. I appreciate it.
Mr. Elliott.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few comments, questions. Peter, you referred to a heavy industrial user came offline, but our charges back from the region didn't correlate to the wastewater that's going in for treatment. So I know that 50% of it's fixed cost, but the other 50% chargeback for the usage, we weren't reduced by that amount in volume. So how do we attribute that much volume extra in the system when a large user comes offline?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. You want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Elliott. If you remember last year, we had historic rainfall. There was flooding all over the province. The lake levels were the highest they've been in decades. And unfortunately, because that all happened last year, the extraneous flows happened, went to the wastewater plant. We didn't see the benefit of the industrial customer coming offline to reduce the flows going to the plant because we had that bulge last spring that just overwhelmed everybody. So that's kind of, we're hoping, mind you, based on this weekend, I don't know what's going to happen, but we're hoping that we will see that reduction in flow to the sewage plant because that industrial flow has been taken offline. But again, it's the weather. We're at the mercy of the weather when it comes to wastewater.
Okay.
And because, I just wanted to add one thing, we're basing our wastewater revenues and flows on our metered water volumes. Wastewater is far more than water. Like, I know people say, but I water my grass. It didn't go in the sewer system. Well, it kind of does eventually because you get your extraneous flows, you get your infiltration. And unfortunately, there's no way. Someone said, well, we put a meter in everybody's sewer line leaving the house. Well, we can't, really. There's nothing out there that reliably measures because you got all kinds of stuff besides water leaving people's houses. So it's the way most water systems are set up to just basically what your meter reads is what you pay for your sewer as well.
Sewer. Okay. So does that mean, just tossing it out to whoever, so our sewer system seems to be fairly leaky. If all of the water that drains in is, you say infiltration and inflow is a huge issue. How bad is the sanitary system?
Well, I'll just quickly, it's not necessarily that the system's leaky, but it's the fact that people have downspouts, sump pumps. So it's not just that it's, you know, I'll let Chris expand on that more.
Yeah.
That's his area.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor, or to continue on Darlene's train of thought, is that we may have laterals on private property that are 20, 30, 50 years old that are leaking. And we don't have control over those specifically. We can TV and monitor and repair our own system, which we've been actively doing, as you can see by the budget numbers that you graciously approve every year. But moving forward on that, we've got our system now. I'll be the first to admit that it's not perfectly tight, no way, no how. That will never happen. That's a pipe dream. But we are constantly working and constantly reviewing and analyzing to try to figure out where those extra flows are coming from. So now we have to move it to the next phase, if you would, and try to find out how we can alleviate these flows that we aren't seeing necessarily coming from our contribution.
Okay. So two-part question then. If we know, and you had already said that about 40% of the city has storms, so 60% of the city doesn't. Do we have it on a bylaw that it is illegal to have your sump and your downspouts connected to sanitary?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Elliott, yes, that is true.
Do we go and test for that?
We could test for that, but the issue is that we need to somehow, some way supply them with an outlet to make that disconnect. And that's the next step, if you would, in the process.
So if you just disconnected straight from the sanitary sewer and dumped it on your grass, eventually it still finds its way back in.
Yeah. At some point it will find its way, some way, somehow, over time. A good portion of it, at least.
So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't then. So actually, the users that are complaining about our rates are contributing to increasing the rates because the water that they're pumping out of their house goes into the sanitary when it doesn't have to be to get treated. So I looked at it and I thought, okay, so here's the cost-benefit analysis. What's your cost of running storm sewers as opposed to just going on with the system that's now and just pay the little bit of increase every year on the treatment of water as opposed to millions of dollars of investment in storm sewers? Because where I am, out in the woods, Glenwood, Homewood, and everything, there are no storm sewers. And we just did a project over on the east side, and if you know, $8 million project, what's the payback on that, and how long before we see the net benefit of paying that off? I mean, that should be value for money, right? You go and you did all this, when are we going to see the cost savings on that project? So that's where I am. What's the benefit of either or?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Elliott. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's something that should be addressed at some point in time, as to the cost benefit, as you put it. Is the savings that we get from, say, the projects you refer to, where we're looking at $8 million, but a portion of it obviously funded by other agencies, which made it lucrative for us to go that way. But that aside, if we didn't have that, then that cost analysis would be totally skewed. But you're absolutely right. We're looking at sometimes paybacks of in excess of 60 and 80 years, depending on how many were in that specific watershed or whatever. And everyone is different, so you can't generalize and just say that this payback. You have to analyze each one separately.
That was kind of a discussion that I had today. So it was just one other quick question. As far as the new meters go, we went into the new water meter system, hoping to see an increase in the amount billed. Now that we've been on that system fully for a while, has there been an increase in the amount billed?
Mrs. Sutter?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Elliott, this is the graph that I provided to Peter earlier today. We weren't able to start analyzing our monthly meter data due to a bunch of different technological challenges until June of this year. So we are able to now analyze every month how much goes through the water meters compared to what we purchase from the region. So this gap is still there, unfortunately, but however, we do know with all the new meters in place, we do have accurate consumption data that we know is what is coming in every month. That's something we lacked before. We used to just take the, because it took us 3 weeks to read the meters by walking, and we did it every quarter, you had to do averaging. So these numbers are not averages, the numbers in the blue line, these are the actual metered consumption that passed through every meter in Port Colborne each month. And these are all the averages in this one that Peter's showing. So it is, we do know for sure we're capturing what we're capturing. And Peter's switching graphs on me.
Catch up on
There we go.
the build year over.
Yeah.
Is there a slide that shows year over year?
Unfortunately, no,
No?
because the data is all estimated. And actually, before, we used to present the data that was the amount billed, which was a calculated volume based on the rate and divided by the amount of revenue that was brought in divided by the rate was the volume. This is the actual cubic meters of volume now in the blue line since June. And I can now provide that every month. I can give you the actual metered volume, which is different, maybe different from the billed volume, because there's things like where if they have to do an estimated bill for some reason, there's the revenue side's different from consumption sometimes. There's a correlation, but it's money. I have to wrap my head around that one.
But is there a measurable that we can see with the new meters that
how much we've gained?
How much we've gained?
I think
because we were kind of looking at being self-sustaining on that the cost of the program was going to pay itself back with increase in billing.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, when we did the program, when it was proposed, we were estimating we were losing about $30,000 annually, based on how inaccurate the meters were, and they would have just kept getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
But we are seeing, we definitely have captured that with the new meters because they are bang on accurate.
Okay.
So unfortunately, we can't really quantify it because we weren't measuring the actual consumption every month. We were doing estimates based on averaging and all that other stuff. These are the actual, since June, I've been able to calculate the actual metered volume every month, citywide.
So going forward from June, we'll have historical data to work with to see what's going on?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Doucette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just one last question. Well, two, technically. The status quo on capital, if we leave status quo on capital, and you sort of answered it a little while ago in saying that there are projects that we were looking forward to doing that we won't be able to do because we will have not put the extra money in it to be able to spend that money going forward. So I have the answer to that, and I think it's important for everyone to know that if you don't put money in capital, then you can't fix and cannot go back and repair what needs to be repaired. So some of it will have to stay out. So that's important for everyone to realize that. The other thing is, empty lots still have to pay fixed costs, right? You said something about the industries when they went offline. They are still, they are still paying fixed costs, are they not?
Mr. Mayor, yes.
Okay, that the way I understood it is they weren't, and I'm trying to figure out, well, why wouldn't they if everyone else does? So
No, yeah, they are.
okay, they don't pay for the usage because they don't have any, but they still pay for the fixed costs. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Bain.
I'm going to ask this one of Steve, because he hasn't had a chance to talk. Does the city maintain the cleanouts, where the laterals, where the house laterals go to the, we always have those. Are they inspected on a regular basis? Because I know there was one on my property that needed a bolt to keep the cap on because the cap was always off. Is that a program that you guys look at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Main. It's not exactly a recurring on an annual basis. It's more on a call-out basis. So if there is an issue with the clean-out, it's more on a call-out basis that we put a service request in, and operations would go out and correct the issue.
Okay. Because some of them are under the ground, right? I mean, people have landscaped, and I was just wondering how big of a problem that would be.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you're exactly right. And there, a lot of them are either under the grass, in a driveway, or in a garden, like you say. So it is difficult to find them at some times.
Okay, thank you.
Question perhaps for Mr. Lee. The East Village improvements are now completed. Would we anticipate seeing the benefits of the improvements to those lines starting this year and moving forward? And would that impact Mr. Sinessa's calculation?
To you, Mr. Mayor, that's absolutely correct. There's probably approaching 200 connections in that we found out through the construction process. And those lines that were contributing directly to the sanitary sewer now have dedicated storm sewer outfalls with storm sewer connections. Then we've made those connections right to the sump pumps. The municipality has paid for the connections internally within the buildings so that we know that it's done legally and meets our sewer use bylaws. So we hope to receive some kind of an indication on that going forward, trying to hopefully not have any more weather like this weekend, but affecting other areas. But we're hoping to see some signs of some feedback on that in the very near future for 2018.
When would we see that? Are we
Well,
looking at 12 months? Or
it should happen over the next 12 months, but the system is just, all of the timing on all of the sewer lateral connections now is completed, if I remember right. So those have all been done, so we're looking at probably 3/4 of this year where we'll have a complete separated system within that neighborhood.
Thank you.
So that'll give us some numbers going forward, hopefully.
Mr. Siness, this higher industrial user now treats his own water, and so it's come off the system. And I think you said that was the second one that happened, that we were subjected to this. Are there any other large industrial users that we anticipate might come off the system, or are we pretty well headed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't know if there's any other ones that may, but I don't believe so, because they probably don't have the property to build a system. But over the years, there's been, industries that have come off the system just because they've also moved out, Robin Hood type of thing. So over the years, that's where it's gone from 50% to 6% of industrial usage. So over the years, we've seen that happen. Either they've gone off the system because they've gone out of business, or they've left, or they've also built their own treatment plant and they're treating their own water. So I don't have any indication. I don't know if Darlene has had any indication, but I don't think we've had any that there would be any other ones coming soon.
Thank you. And I'll just repeat that the non-billable water loss is between 27% and 40%, which we all agree is pretty high. Should we be looking at stopping somewhere, or not moving forward with some of our capital projects and applying that money to a program that addresses these leaks?
Good.
To you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, we haven't completely annihilated the capital program, so don't forget that. We've used many sources of funding. We have two water main projects that are coming up now. There was one going this year and one early in the spring, which were funded with huge amounts from other sources. So we're using other grants and tax and non-taxed fundings from municipal taxes to build these new water mains. Janet Street's the one. The other one is the Carter Street replacements. So those are all going forward with funds from grant monies and whatever that's not coming out of this specific budget per se. So we're looking at creative ways to try to do these things, but still trying to keep the budget numbers to a lesser number, if you would, for lack of a better term.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott.
Speaking of funding, is there any funding that you've seen for storm sewers? Because I can't remember who it was now, just cited that a project that they did was a storm sewer project, and it was under a funding of greening, You know, and I can't remember who it was, somebody local that said it. Is there any funding around for storm sewer replacement and anything like that, seeing how we need storm sewers replaced?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor, at this point in time, we're not specifically aware of anything, but I'll guarantee you, if it comes down the pipe, we will jump on it.
Comes down the broken pipe?
No pun intended.
Yes, Mr. Sinester.
So we have tapped into some granting programs, like Chris had mentioned for the Janet and Carter Street, and also the storm sewer project that we just did over on the east side. That was through a grant program. We got $2 million towards that program. So we have tapped into some grant programs that we knew were available and applied, and if we met the criteria. So you have to also make sure that we meet the criteria. We have applied to other areas, other things for storm sewers. For example, Clarence Street at one time, and they refused our grant application. So it all depends. We know we have this other grant process coming up, the federal provincial one, which we're going to be applying with the downtown CIP when that comes forward, and that will, I believe, that also includes some storm sewer work for the downtown area. So, so it is, and there is a green. There is a of that program. I think there is a green component to that program, but because that project is going to be such a big project, we're going to be going for the gusto on that project, and probably not looking at other storm sewers.
Thank you, Mr. Sinester. It would appear we have exhausted our questions. We have a recommendation on the floor. Does council want to address their concerns right now to that proposal, and whether we should to move forward with a recommendation to be voted upon? Yes, Councilor Demery.
Sorry, I was just saying that we should just call the question.
Councilor Doucette.
You need someone to put it on the floor, right?
No, we have it's on the floor. Yes, we do. It would appear they're ready for the vote. All those in favor of the recommendation? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? 1. The recommendation carries. There being no further business, I guess we do have 3 bylaws. Madam Clerk, could you read those for us? We'll deal with these in bulk.
There's 3 bylaws on the floor tonight. The first one is 6568-23-18, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 3151-22-95 as amended, being a bylaw to regulate the supply of water and to provide for the maintenance and management of the waterworks and for the imposition and collection of water rates. The second one is bylaw 6569-24-18, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 3424-9-97 as amended, being a bylaw for the imposition and collection of sewage service rates and sewer rates. And the last bylaw is 6570-25-18, being a bylaw to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of council of the Corporation of the City of Port Colborne at a special meeting on April 16th, 2018.
Okay. Any questions? There being none, all those in favor of those 3 bylaws? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 1. Carried. There being no further business this evening, call for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Demery, seconded by Councilor Doucette. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much for your attention this evening and for those who have responded to our scintillating questions. Peter, thank you for preparing your explanations. They are appreciated.